Welcome back to Ron's Radio Corner. I had thought that today I would talk about this radio, which is a Prunus J160. But I just watched a video on YouTube where someone is basically outfitting a vintage radio with Bluetooth. And it sort of triggered me to want to talk a little bit more about Bluetooth and radio. Um, and this is a good starting point because one of the reasons I bought this little radio is it's AM FM shortwave, which wasn't terribly important to me, but also Bluetooth. And I thought this would be a great little travel radio. You go someplace, you're staying overnight in a hotel, you pull this radio out, connect it to your phone. It's got better sound quality than the phone. You can still have the ability to kind of use your phone if you wanted to look something up or something while it's playing music. And it wasn't expensive. It was $25. Nice sounding radio. This is starting to sound like I'm going to cover this radio instead of talking about Bluetooth. But um, but after I bought this radio, I went and bought that radio. And again, that's a Sangen WR16. This one's AM/FM, has an auxiliary connection, and it has Bluetooth. And for a long time, I had looked at the Sangen radios and thought I would really like to buy one because I love the look of it. I had read great things about it. Also, always really liked the Tivoli Model 1s. Couldn't quite ever justify buying one. I have enough radios. I don't need another radio just to have a dedicated table radio. I just, for a long time, couldn't pull the trigger. Couldn't justify it in my own mind. And this model, because it has Bluetooth, was a little more expensive. And I always kind of figured I wanted the Bluetooth because I wanted that additional functionality to be able to connect it to my phone or some other device, laptop or whatnot, and play music from there. Now, there's a couple of different points I can go in here. The first is, yesterday I went on a little bit of a drive. Just hopped in the car, drove for maybe an hour or so to go check out some destination. The entire time I was in the car, I was listening to music that was coming off of my phone. Um, you know, you get in, the car automatically detects that your phone's there, it connects, and the entire time, literally, I punched in one song, and then from there, it, that streaming service just kept a music playlist going. And I find that is how I listen to my music most of the time. I've kind of mentioned that in other videos. To the point that at some point I got into the car and didn't connect it to my phone and found it awkward to use the radio, which is kind of stupid to say, but it's just not intuitive. The radio is really designed to be like a media center, and I've never really taken the time to figure it out. I mean, I know how to tune it into a station, but it's not like one of the radios here where you just spinning up and down the dial, or even as simple as, well, I guess it does have a track button, but to me it's not as intuitive as as the old car radios where you had a volume knob on one side and a tuning knob on the other. But it doesn't need to be, because again, I think most people in the car are either listening to satellite radio if they have a subscription, or they're probably streaming music, or if they do, they really are radio listeners. They're most likely locked into a specific station, and that's where they leave it. The other point I could go in here is when I purchased the Prunus, at the same time I also purchased a C-Crane FM transmitter too, and was going to use that, and do use that, to stream music from my well, not broadcast music from my laptop that I could pick up on radios I have in the house, specifically my GE Super Radio 3. 'Cause it's a great sounding radio. Well, when I bought this engine, somewhere crossed my mind that since I had that FM transmitter, I really didn't need to buy a Sangen that had Bluetooth. I could have bought the WR11 or one of the other models that they don't have Bluetooth, and I would still be able to use it to listen to whatever music I wanted to in the house, thanks to FM transmitter. It turned out that when I came across this one on Amazon, the price was so good for this particular model that I jumped at it. And it really was. It was a terrific price. I paid under $50 for this, maybe $50 with the tax, for a radio that normally goes for 100 or more, depending on where you're looking. Which is why I bought it. At that price point, now I couldn't justify not buying it. So back to this video. The gentleman has a vintage radio, and he is doing a video about outfitting it with Bluetooth. And he talks a little bit about that. And I'm going to just pause for 1 second. And I did that so I could bring this into the camera. And this is a 48 or 49 RCA Globetrotter. I can't remember the specific model. I should have looked it up before I put it on camera, but I didn't. So he takes this vintage radio, which is an AM/FM radio, and he goes through the process of adding Bluetooth to it. So here I am talking about why I think every radio today probably should have Bluetooth, just because it increases that functionality. So many people today are not listening to radio in the traditional sense of, oh, it's a radio station with a radio broadcast and I'm picking it up on a station on the FM dial. Instead, when they talk about listening to radio, they're talking about listening to something streaming from a radio station, and they're connected to it on Bluetooth or in some other means. That's certainly not everybody, but I think I mentioned this the other day, that there's a couple of reports that I've seen that basically talked about somewhere between 50 and 75%, depending on which report I looked at, of people who listen to music are listening to it from a streaming service. So I really do think there is, a need for radio companies to consider how, or radio manufacturers to consider how do they keep their product viable. And one of those ways is make sure that it sounds pretty good for its size and give it the functionality of being a Bluetooth speaker. Now, the interesting thing is, the entire time I'm watching this video, this gentleman, I'm going to put that link to that video down below, and that gentleman is wiring up Bluetooth for this radio. I'm thinking to myself, why go through all that trouble for a vintage radio? Why not just use, an FM or an AM transmitter? And he actually does use an AM transmitter at some point to kind of showcase just how good the radio sounds. So really, this is the idea of, here's this radio, let's meet the challenge of, can we do something interesting with it? Now, the radio I put up here, unfortunately, no longer works. It did work when I got it. I got this, back in 2008, and it played. But it's AM only. And I had other radios. And it's a bit heavy. And the proprietary battery that this used, I doubt you could find one out there that still works. Although I would love it if someone was clever enough to take some lithium batteries and create a battery pack for this, because my understanding is an old tube radio, the batteries had like almost a two-part component to it. One part allowed the radio to draw power to warm up the tubes, and then the other part in the battery would actually power the radio for broadcast. But this radio here, AM only, hardly ever used it because of that. I had other radios to use, and I went to go plug it in maybe a couple of years ago and realized that it probably needs to be recapped, and it no longer plays. Now, interestingly enough, I have seen online where someone has taken one of these radios, gone through it, recapped it, added Bluetooth to it, and was selling it for actually a pretty reasonable price, considering I'm not a guy who can go and recap a radio by myself. I'm not that handy, and when I've looked into it, most places I've looked at have been a little too expensive to make me want to go rush out and do that. Although I really am thinking of having that done to this radio. Most places the price would be too high to make it worth my while. So you see it on on the internet, guy selling the radio. He's already done that work and he's added Bluetooth. You think that's pretty cool. If I get this recapped, I probably will not add Bluetooth because I think where I'm going to go, that's not an option. But I probably will end up looking for an AM transmitter so that I can use this from time to time with an AM transmitter and broadcast music and kind of get some life out of this. So the interesting thing to me watching this gentleman do this is, one, he talked about not wanting to gut the radio, that in collecting collectible radio circles, there's some conversation around that preserve the radio, don't just gut it and add modern components to turn it into a Bluetooth speaker and just to use the shell. And I sort of agree with that. I see a lot of that when you poke around, eBay or some of these other sites where people have taken a vintage radio, gutted it, and all you're getting is that shell with modern components in it. And I think if you're someone who's handy and you have a radio where somewhere along the way someone has already gutted it, it's a radio that was sitting out in the barn or up in an attic or something like that, and the components were pulled out of it years ago and you don't have them, and or they're so badly damaged you couldn't fix the radio. Hey, if you're going to preserve that cabinet and that's what you want to do, go ahead. I'm going to be honest, I guess if you own a radio and that's what you want to do, sure, radio, do what you want with it. But personally, I think it's much more interesting to make it work again than it is to gut it out and just kind of reuse the case because you like the style. That goes back to that Prunus, which, there's the idea of wanting that retro style, but with all the, the insides being modern and with some of the perks, Bluetooth and a DSP chip and an internal battery that can be recharged and so on. But in the end, he does manage to get the Bluetooth, connected, the Bluetooth device sort of connected to the radio, and he gets it working, which is cool. Again, I think I would have just gone with the route of an FM transmitter for the vintage radio, but I get what he's trying to do, right? Why need a third device? To me, though, by the time you go through all the effort to wire it in there, plus the expense of buying whatever, I wonder if you just couldn't buy an FM transmitter. Now, the C. Crane FM transmitter is not inexpensive, but it works really well. But there are less expensive ones. I guess you might argue that the sound quality is guaranteed to be better if you're using, a Bluetooth device that you've connected to the radio. But that's kind of it. Just wanted to talk a little bit more about Bluetooth. Thought it was really cool. Check out the video that I mentioned before. It's not someone I've watched before, so I can't tell you what the rest of the videos are like. I'll probably give his channel a little bit more of a look, but it's about collectible radios, and so that's pretty cool. And again, Bluetooth. People say to me, "Why do I think it's so important?" Or someone said to me, "Why do I think it's so important?" On an emergency radio, I think it's a nicety if you're using the radio for more than just being prepared for an emergency. But for every other radio, I really do think that if you're coming out with a radio today in 2024, having Bluetooth on it just broadens its appeal. Um, so I'll leave it with that. So until the next time, thanks.